Welcome, Drink with James, episode 190. You guessed it, we are talking about the only thing that people are talking about right now, coronavirus, COVID-19. Before we get into this, I will say what I am sure you're sick of hearing, but is important, which is that you should be limiting your exposure to other people if you can. Fohr is going remote as of tomorrow. Well, as of the publishing of this video today, we will be working remotely for at least 2 weeks. That is to not only minimize the amount of exposure our employees have, but to protect the more vulnerable in our society who would have a harder time recovering from the virus. The other is to wash your hands. Wash your hands, wash your hands, wash your hands. Very important. Today, I am not going to talk about washing your hands and staying away from people, but instead, what do I think this is going to do to influencers and the influencer space in general? I think there are a lot of changes that could come from this virus and from the reaction to it. And I'm just going to get into those really quickly. First, I think that there is actually a good chance that influencer spend could increase as a whole. There's a few reasons why. First, brands are going to be moving money around from a lot of different places right now, right? You have events being canceled, not only just brand events that they've done or are planning to do, but Coachella, South by Southwest, potentially the Olympics, NBA. There are a huge amount of things being canceled right now. And if you just think about the TV advertising alone that would have been spent on the NBA, and let's say they cancel, other F1, all these other leagues that they could cancel these sporting events, they are not going to be able to sell advertising against that. So there is a huge amount of budget that is going to be floating around. And more importantly, those brands need to be able to get in front of their consumers, car brands, alcohol, beer, like anyone who is advertising in sports, think about that, needs to be able to reach consumers. Influencers is a way to do that potentially. And then anyone that is activating at big events such as South by, Coachella, potentially the Olympics, these things are going to have repercussions, and I can definitely see some of that budget flowing into influencers. The other thing is that brands could potentially be canceling their campaign shoots because on a normal campaign shoot, you could have 20 or 30 people. And moving some of that content creation budget to influencers who can create content as a kind of full stack. They can do the modeling, they can do the shooting, they can do the editing, they can do the planning, they can do it all. They can do it all while they're quarantined. So there's a chance that those budgets start going to influencers as well. Another thing is that as people work from home more and are feeling more socially isolated and practice social distancing, they are still going to need that social, emotional connection to other people. And increasingly, they will get that from social media, meaning they're going to be spending more time on social media, meaning that brands will want to be able to get access to those eyeballs, meaning they will work with influencers more to do that. Another part is that as people get more anxious, they're looking for a way to escape. They're looking for some way to forget their anxiety for even a second, and sometimes seeing a sheet mask that a influencer recommended and buying that and getting it ordered to your house is just a little hit of normalcy and escapism that can make you feel better because there's not a lot of news out there that is making you feel better. And the last part that is going to drive this is that brands, I believe, will increasingly be shifting budgets away from advertising that pushes people in store and towards their online retailers. We saw this in China. E-com sales increased when the quarantine started. E-com sales will definitely increase in the US as people look to go to malls less and go shopping IRL less. That means budgets are going to shift into digital. Some of that will shift into the influencer space. Now, there are some negative things that we need to talk about, right? I think even though I believe that influencer spend on a whole could increase, I think per influencer, it is smart to assume that you might make 20 or 30% less this year than next year. Because while budgets could flow into the influencer space, and while the percentage of ad spend spent on influencers could increase, the overall budgets might decrease dramatically. And here at Fohr, we are running analysis on what making 10, 20, 30% less this year looks like for us, just so we are aware of those implications. That is obviously not our expectation, but you need to be prepared. And I think as an influencer, you should think about how much money you made last year, take 20 or 30%, knock it off, and budget and operate as if that is what you're making. It is better to be safe than broke. And you should very quickly be thinking about how you can live further within your means and save and assume you'll be making less money this year. There are some influencers that it's going to be harder to do work right now. Travel influencers, obviously difficult. If you are somebody that is talking about restaurants or bars a lot, could be more difficult as people do that less. If you're a photography influencer, if your whole thing is shooting and you're not allowed to leave your apartment, obviously it's going to be difficult to create great content. If you're an adventure person and you go camping and that's what you shoot, I mean, maybe that will be easier because you'll be away from everybody. But in general, travel influencers could have a hard time. I think influencers that have super editorial content that includes more complex shoots could have a more difficult time as our movements become more restricted. Another thing is that brand and press trips are going to disappear very quickly if they haven't already. So those influencers who are doing a lot of traveling on behalf of brands, who are being flown around a lot by brands, we're just not going to see as much of that anymore. And so if that is something that you do a lot of, I would think, I would assume you're not going to do much of that for the next 6 months. And I think that overall, people will want to be following people that feel like friends, that feel like they have a connection to them. And I think the influencers who have built a connection with their audience will hold that connection through this crisis. And I think influencers who are followed more out of, more like a celebrity, a distant celebrity that you don't have a relationship with, I think those people could suffer as their audiences are looking for some comfort and looking to engage with people that they feel like they have a relationship with, that they're in this together with them, and they care about what they have to say. Another thing is that, for brands, budgets are going to just matter more, okay? Like we have lost an enormous amount of wealth in the stock market in the last few weeks. If there are mass quarantines, there is going to be, sales of businesses are going to be decimated, This means marketing budgets are going to be rolled back, as I said before. And while they will still spend money in influencer marketing, and as I said before, maybe a larger percentage of that marketing stack is going to be influencer marketing, each dollar is going to be so much more important. And each dollar is going to be scrutinized so much more than it was maybe when budgets were a little bit looser. That means that as an influencer, you have to work harder. You have to be better. You have to make sure that the work you're doing is driving value for brands, because they're going to be looking at those dollars that they're spending much more closely than they have in the past. And those influencers that feel like they're just doing it for a paycheck are going to have a really hard time competing in this new world. I think that brands are going to increasingly going to want to work with influencers that feel like they really love the brand, that they are authentic ambassadors for that brand, instead of people that they had to pay to get to talk about it. I also, with budgets mattering more, I think that what you can charge as an influencer is going to fall potentially. If this is a sustained crisis that lasts a number of months, there was going to be a drop in demand for influencers potentially as budgets fall. And with that drop and with the increased scrutiny on each influencer, there is going to be pressure to drop prices to make sure it makes sense, right? If you're charging $2,000 and delivering $1,000 of value and you're not closing deals, and you change that to $800, now you're providing $1,000 of value. Now that's a positive ROI, and you can get deals. This is what happens when some scarcity is introduced into a market, is that prices fall, and I think that is something that influencers have to be ready for. And you should have a conversation with your manager today about your pricing, and make sure that you tell them to be cognizant of what is happening in the world, and make sure that they're working with brands and that they're not over-optimizing to raise the price as high as possible on an individual deal, so that that brand can feel like you're a partner with them. Feel like, hey, we're all going through a hard time. We still want to work with you, but our budgets aren't as big as they used to be. That you're there to help them through that, not say, well, I don't care that your budgets aren't where they are. I still deserve the same amount of money I used to get. You have to understand this is a market, and the rates you charge are set by that market. And if the market decides they don't want to pay those rates, you have to react to it, because you will get left behind very, very quickly if you don't. Last kind of larger point is that with the mood in the country, with the anxiety, with this literally being life and death for some people, inauthentic ads, inauthentic collaborations you do with brands are going to seem that much worse. Something that your audience would forgive you for doing 2 months ago, they may not forgive you today. So you really have to think about the brand partners you bring on, what kind of brand it is, what the message is, before you go and do that post. I think it's why brands are going to optimize for influencers that have existing love for the brand, that they really feel like have been an advocate before, so that they know these posts are going to be really authentic. I think that we could see mailings, and gifting fall. One, as it starts to feel a little bit frivolous in this kind of anxious environment that we're in, but also the fact that people don't want to be handling packages because you don't know who's touched it and if there's germs on that package. And I think, something I talked to Grace Atwood about this morning is that influencers are going to have to be more transparent with their audience, and they're going to have to explain that, look, they're not ignoring what is happening in the world, but they're still trying to do their job. And you still have to do your job of telling great stories to your audience, of making sure that there's a place on the internet where they can go that can still feel fun and lighthearted, and can still be about something that they're passionate about. And that matters. That matters in a crisis more, and I think while you don't have to change your content and only talk about coronavirus, you do have to acknowledge that the world has changed and the world continues to change, and that people's lives are affected, and that you, like everyone else, has a job to do, and you're going to continue to do it. And I think caveating that will go a long way in building trust with your audience and making sure that those brand partnerships really work. In closing, I still am optimistic about this industry. I know that we will get through this crisis, because I know what you guys do is valuable, and I know that the relationship that you have with your following is real. But we also have to be prepared to understand that the world is going to be different coming out of this. It's not just going to go back to how it used to be at all. And that could be, in the favor of this industry or not in the favor of this industry. But much like when if you do dry January and you don't drink for a month, and then the next, when you come out of that month, you've kind of reset your habits, and maybe you just never drink as much as you used to before that. The industry might do the same things. We might look at influencer trips and say, those were maybe a huge waste of time and money. Maybe we don't need to do those anymore because we didn't do them for 6 months and it didn't affect it at all. Or, this influencer I worked with all the time, we stopped working with them for a while and sales didn't drop. Maybe they weren't actually doing anything. We have to be ready for that. And you have to know that the dollars are going to matter more now than ever, and you have to work harder than ever to prove yourself. And of course, I will close with saying, be safe. Make sure that you are, communicating the same to your audience. to practice social distancing, to practice, to wash your hands and to not touch your face. Every little action that each individual person does can play a part in protecting the older and more vulnerable parts of our society that could be decimated by this virus if we are flippant about it and allow it to spread. So good luck out there. Stay safe. We'll see you next week.